This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law. Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now, we introduce our guests and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. In the last few years, there have been an increasing number of lawsuits brought against the New York City Police Department, and also the individual officers accused of brutality. Today we'll talk to City Councilman Sheldon Loeffler, Chairman of the Public Safety Committee, which oversees the Police Department, and Robert Conason, who represents the mother of Amadou Diallo, who was killed in a barrage of 41 bullets fired by the four officers. Hello, City Councilman. Hello, Bob.
Good morning, Al.
Bob, can you tell us basically about this case, the Diallo case, what happened there, and what are you suing for?
Well, I think that most of the people know the general newspaper reports of what happened, that he was indeed an innocent person who the police shot about 19 times, fired 41 bullets, and an innocent man, and as you know, he died at the time. The suit really is for multiple purposes, but obviously there's a wrongful death action, that he was wrongfully killed by the City of New York Police Department. There's a claim for punitive damages. There's a potential what they call 1983 claim, which would be somewhat different, including attorney fees and things of that nature, and possibly punitive damages under 1983.
What is 1983?
That's a statutory right that in the federal law you have a right. The number of the statute is 1983, so we call it 1983 litigation.
Why am I confused? I thought that you cannot get punitive damages against a municipality. Am I wrong?
You can get punitive damages against the police officers, but the municipality is immune in New York City, not all municipalities, by statute. Now, whether they'll indemnify the policemen for punitive damages or not is still an open question. The PBA certainly has put a lot of pressure on the city to indemnify them if a police officer is found responsible for punitive damages.
Interesting. So you're saying it's more of a contractual issue between the Policemen's Benevolent Association and the City of New York, whether or not they indemnify their own police officers for punitive damages.
Whether they will, right.
Has that been determined yet? Is that in their contract?
No, it's an open question.
Okay. Councilman Loeffler, now you oversee the police department. That's your job. How are you doing?
How am I doing?
Yeah, how are you doing? I mean,
Unlike Mayor Koch, I leave it to others to judge how I'm doing.
How is this oversee process?
Right.
Are you happy with the results of what's happening in our streets?
Well, I think the Diallo case was, a tragic situation. I regret it immensely. I don't run the police department. The police department is run by the police commissioner, who reports directly to the mayor. We're independently elected. We pass laws that pertain to the police department, and we hold hearings from time to time, twice a month, with respect to matters concerning the proper functioning of the police department, in order to try to see to it that problems are corrected. We've had a number of hearings with respect to the Diallo case, but from the point of view of the functioning of the street crimes unit. Back on February 16th, I urged that the council hold a hearing and do investigative work to see the extent to which recommendations that I and the staff made following the Louima case. And I think it's very important to see the extent to which recommendations that we've previously made have in fact been implemented or not been implemented, because unfortunately these issues of excessive use of force, horrendous acts of harm to residents of the city, continue.
Now, Bob, I know you sue the city, and you've sued the city before for police misconduct. Well, now you have the councilman responsible for at least trying to get laws passed to oversee this area. What do you want to say to him?
There's been a proliferation of these cases. They haven't been diminished. They're sort of growing. And I don't mean just that people are more conscious of cases that seem perfectly legitimate of overreaction by the police department. If you look at the street crime unit, they're really almost entirely involved in minority areas. And this raises certain problems as to I mean, they were anyway before they've been pulled back. But this was a unit which I think, Councilman, 98% of the time was spent in districts with very sharp minority people.
Well, you're right also that the cases seem to be increasing because the city controller just recently issued a report in which he said that there was $28.3 million in recoveries against the police department in the past year, 1998, which is an all-time high. So
sounds like a lot of money.
No, it's a great deal of money, and I think it goes to the point which you've made that we need a police department that's more responsible, that tries to correct these instances, that better monitors the police, that imposes discipline, and that takes steps to prevent certainly the same officers from recurring acts of wrongdoing as to which there are recoveries, not to mention the personal tragedies involved sometimes.
Councilman, do you have any recommendations regarding training of the police officers or something of that nature?
Yeah, there are all sorts of things that have to be improved upon. First, obviously, outreach, recruitment. And then training has to be improved. In fact, the council in this year's budget funded a consultant, an outside consultant, who will make recommendations with respect to improved training in the department to reduce instances of excessive force.
And what about the street crime unit? What were your recommendations regarding that particular unit?
We had a number of recommendations, including that the police should wear uniforms, that there should be a reduction in the instances of stops and frisks, which seem to, as you said, be done most of the time without any finding of wrongdoing by the person who stopped, or even any question of threat to the police officer. There were all too many cases of...
I'm sorry, Councilman, but why aren't the police being trained and given weapons which could stop people who may be assaultive or crazy or attacking, but not dangerous to life? Provide weapons that will stop them, maim them. But we emphasize quicker bullets, more dangerous
I think
weapons.
that really came to light with the instance within the last week of Gideon Bush in Borough Park. I thought there that killing him was extreme, not I didn't think really necessary, that there ought to be better means of restraining somebody. And there are other means. The police said that they tried pepper spray. It didn't work. But that doesn't mean they had to escalate it to 12 or so shots. Particularly following that case, too, issues of training are going to be re-examined. And in fact, the Public Safety Committee plans to hold this fall a hearing with respect to how the police deal with individuals with mental health or depression types of problems, such as Gideon Bush had, to try to improve their training. As you say, we think training can be improved in this area. We should learn from these lessons, but we don't seem to. That's what's troubling me. I mean, a Diallo case is a learning tool as well as everything else. And I know Mrs. Diallo, for example, who's a outspoken woman, I mean, very, very articulate. She wants something positive to come out of the tragedy, not a negative context. She wants something good to come out of it. Awareness, a foundation, something where people could work together to improve things. I have often felt, I have, the first step in learning and improving is to accept that there was a problem that created the first instance. And unfortunately, time after time, like in the Gideon Bush case or the Diallo case...
Gideon Bush, what happened there?
Well, that was the case with the Orthodox Jewish person in Borough Park, was apparently causing some distress to his neighbors. The police came to his apartment and sought to calm the situation, but Mr. Bush apparently started, walking out of the Department didn't respond to the police. One of the police officers fell, and then he got up and was off balance, and somehow a shot was fired because of a sense that Mr. Bush, who had a hammer in his hand, was a potential threat. The police say even life-threatening threat to the police officers. So they shot him, and they shot him many times.
But he was a man with a long history of mental disturbance, in and out of mental hospitals.
Right.
Somebody who really couldn't take care of himself, and the city has to give protection to people, even though they're for the moment threatening, but not life-threatening.
So
you have a hammer,
right.
you can stun him, you can shoot his leg, you can use weapons.
It's not
that
just
can
even the
cause
city problem, but it's a state problem also. I mean, these people used to be confined in state mental institutions, which have been largely emptied without the sort of follow-up mental health services that was anticipated. As a result, people don't get the treatment, as you say, that they need. He's in the hospital, but he goes out and there's no effective follow-up.
But that's for years. Then we have a bumper case where
Yes,
you had a woman who
1985.
was very mentally disturbed and being
Right.
taken out of the apartment, and and the police overreacted to these
Right.
things. Part of it is training. I mean, part of it is
Right.
and a part is, I think, what the councilman said before, recruitment. Because if you're not getting the proper people with some intelligence, with an understanding to be the police officers, we have trouble.
Of course, when you become a police officer, you're given so much power.
So
Right.
Power over
Life and
people's-
death. Life and
power
death,
over
literally.
life and death.
Right.
And if the person takes that power to
Right.
its ultimate conclusion and cannot properly administer it, this is what happens. You have cases like Diallo, Abner Louima, Anthony Baez, who was killed in the Bronx
Right.
over a ball game.
Right, and that's why it's really a problem for higher-ups in government than the individual police officers, because the city government empowers these police officers to use deadly force. And we see that sometimes they use deadly force. How are we doing all that's possible to see that force is used judiciously as possible, and apparently not. I mean, there are too many instances. On the other hand, I think it's only fair to say that there are millions of interactions yearly among police officers and the public. It is said that the police have learned from the Eleanor Bumpers case. The Bush case is a somewhat different case. It ended tragically. In my judgment, it could have ended better, but I think it's not quite fair to the police to say that the same matter recurs. They're all a little different. You have 40,000 police officers now, and with such a vast number of individuals in the agency, you have all sorts of different reactions.
But of course, you yourself had just indicated over $20 million was spent last year just in compensation to victims and victims' families of police overreaction or brutality or misconduct.
Right.
Certainly, that has to stop and has to be minimized.
It should
yes,
be.
with
Right.
over 30,000 police officers, you're going to have a problem here and there. But now we're having, it appears, almost on a consistent quarterly or even monthly basis that something comes up in this vein. I mean,
Right.
just last week, a police officer, I think, was trying to take somebody out of a taxi cab, fell, gun dislodged, and killed the person.
Right.
Because the person didn't pay
Mr.
the
Watson
cab.
in Harlem. Right.
Yeah.
Didn't
Right.
pay his cab fare.
Right.
Now, whether or not he had an issue with the cab driver or not, we'll never know.
Well, the cab driver in that case alerted the police and said he didn't pay the fare. Catch him. And, in the brouhaha that ensued, that happened.
Not a capital
But-
offense.
No, that's certainly not.
Okay, we're seeing now throughout the world on the internet. So
Can I make one
yes.
point on which I think is important? The sad part about spending $28 million a year is that the city could do more to reduce that. The city does not keep track of a computerized tracking system of all of the officers as to whom judgments are incurred, so as to better monitor those officers, to correlate those cases of civil recoveries with instances of civilian complaints, so that there would be better monitoring of the individual officers, training, retraining, and the like. So I certainly think more can be done with respect to the civil recovery system to fix responsibility to prevent reoccurrences.
We're going to take a break now, but right after the break, I'm going to ask you basically what the facts, as you know it, happened in Amadou Diallo. Okay, we're taking a break now. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us.
It's impossible!
Actually, Coach, it's not. See, Jimmy had to travel a distance of 90 feet. He reached an average speed of 15 miles per hour. The ball left 2 seconds later than Jimmy and had to go 1.5 times the distance.
If education is important to you, talk to your child's school about raising academic standards. Call 1-800-38-BE-SMART for a free booklet and be a big league
Thus
parent.
enabling it to reach the destination at a much quicker rate.
Did you factor in the wind speed?
Your parents are always bugging you to get out of the house and get some exercise. But you've got your own way of doing things. You're your own person. You don't need to follow the crowd or the rules. And the last people you want to be like are your parents.
Johnny, tell them what they want.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. We're talking about police misconduct today. We have City Councilman Sheldon Loeffler and Bob Conason, who represents the Diallo family regarding the death of Amadou Diallo. Now, tell us, Bob, the facts that are reported, like by the newspapers, what were the facts of the Diallo case?
It seems to be, and there's a lot more investigation that has to be done. There's a criminal trial pending that's going to start in January.
Against the officers involved, the 4 officers.
Right. But Mr. Diallo was a young 22-year-old man who came here from Africa really to seek an education. Comes from a very educated family and bright people, was working here temporarily, trying to get into school to start his education and his livelihood and build his life. Not with a great deal of money, living in a poor area in the Bronx, and obviously was mistaken by a group of police officers as some suspect they were looking for. And instead of stopping him and questioning him, he had done nothing wrong, a totally innocent man. And they fired 41 bullets at him.
But they must have had a reason they fired. Something must have happened. Police officers just don't...
We don't know exactly because you get different stories. It was obviously an overreaction. They were looking, they say, for a serial rapist who had been in that area. And when they questioned him, he allegedly turned around quickly, they say, and I have a lot of doubt, that they thought he had a weapon, which he absolutely did not. And when the first policeman fired, the rest followed suit. And 41 shots were fired at a guy with no weapon, perfectly innocent man, decent human being who had no reason to be even questioned by the police, much less
Is it
shot
reported
by
that he
them.
pulled out something that looked like a weapon?
You see a lot of reports, and I think when the criminal trial starts, we'll see which are backed up by evidence and which were really surmised.
And what are the officers being charged with?
Charged with homicide. It's a different
murder.
form. Manslaughter, yeah. It's a manslaughter.
Now, I know you filed a notice of claim with the City of New York on this case. Is that correct? Or you intend to?
A notice of claim was filed by the former attorneys for the state.
And how much money is being asked of the City of New York because of this?
As you know, Alan, an amount, and truthfully I don't even know what it is in the notice of claim because I wouldn't pay attention to it. The notice of claim sets forth an arbitrary amount which is absolutely not related to the case. I really didn't look at it to find that.
Now, does the civil case, which you're suing for civil damages and punitive damages from the city, does that have to wait until the conclusion of the criminal case?
As a practical matter, yes. It's not going to be tried before. For example, we couldn't take testimony from the officers before the criminal case because they would have a right not to answer questions because of self-incrimination. So to a great degree, our efforts are stymied as far as an in-depth investigation.
Now, Councilman Loeffler, you're a public elected official of the City of New York. How do you feel about something of this nature? There's a lawsuit?
I felt terrible about it as soon as it happened. I thought it was really a great tragedy, a great misfortune. He seemed to be, as you said, a fine young man working very hard. He could have been my grandfather. I mean, somebody who came to this country as a very young man and tried to make his way and then could have had a fine life. His parents, your client, seemed to be good people. So I felt that, it was, it's a tragedy. It's very unfortunate.
But what we want is something good to come from it, Alan. And really, we've started an Amadeo Foundation, which former Mayor Dinkins is chairperson of. with an effort to do something now, not only for Africans who come to New York, but for all minority people. And we're looking for aid, not as a crusade, but it's something positive instead of negative to come out of it. So it's easy to be critical of the police department, but what we want to do is constructive ways to improve the situation,
yes, but,
as opposed to destructive ways.
Looking at it from another point of view, you have millions of dollars being spent by the city of New York. You have the Diallo case, which I'm sure will be, they'll be asking probably millions of dollars from the city of New York. I have little doubt about that.
I'm sure.
On the Abla-Louima case, I read they asked for over $100 million.
Really? I thought it was $400 and some odd million. Maybe
Some,
with the punitive
some
damages.
very large
An
sum.
enormous amount of money.
And they say that's because of the punitive aspects of the crime. They've already been convictions.
Right. Volpe pleaded guilty.
And I think there was one other conviction.
And Weiss, too, right.
No, I don't think
not Weiss. Schwarz
was convicted.
Schwarz.
And I can imagine that the city has little or no defense other than that these officers acted without their authority.
Well,
I don't think there's any defense in that case. They're in the scope of employment. Whether they exceeded their authority wouldn't eliminate liability on the city's part.
So, from the point of view, don't you think, would you advise the Corporation Council to try to settle these matters and try to move on?
Well, I'm sure the Corporation Council is considering all possibilities, including settlement of the cases. It should be pointed out, the taxpayers of New York City are paying for this. All the hardworking people who basically, finance the city's tax system are paying for this, and that's another tragedy. I mean, people don't have enough service now. Their kids aren't getting educated sufficiently in the school system, and money has to go to compensate people for a tragedy we wish didn't happen. So, obviously that goes back to what we said originally. This is a situation which has to be improved through better training, through better recruitment, through better monitoring of police officers, through better discipline, to try to prevent recurrences, because the costs here probably are staggering. Louima, Diallo, Baez.
Do you think one of the problems
Baez was settled, I believe, for $3 million. That one case.
Do you think part of the problem is that the police are so fearful today, or have gotten an atmosphere of fear that they're fearful and they're overreacting? I mean, I've never seen as many bad, really clear-cut police brutality cases as we're seeing today. And it includes prison guards. Yeah. We're seeing, look, that case out in Nassau, we're seeing prison guards, people of authority, maybe in fearful situations, have to be trained not to overreact to the situation. That doesn't mean that policemen don't have a very difficult job. I think we're all appreciative of many good policemen and many good things that come out of good police work. But we have to realize we've got a major problem that needs to be addressed.
But there are each case stands on its own. I mean, the officers as to whom there's hundreds of millions of dollars being sought in the Louima case, they were not afraid. They basically had complete control over him in the police station.
That was a sadistic kind of
right. So it varies from time to time. But I do think that fear, by the cops, is part of the equation here. And in fact, one of the things the police, unions say is that if you're too tough in monitoring this and disciplining in this area, you're really penalizing the officers, and they're not going to be acting as proactively and aggressively as cops because they're too fearful of what the consequences are going to be.
But there's a balance. We want good police. We want policemen who do their job properly. But you can't have these gross abuses. And I must say, it's not just a New York City problem.
Right.
We see it in Nassau County. We certainly see it in New Jersey. They just indicted some troopers in New Jersey. Right. I saw it in today's newspaper. So it's not just a local problem.
Let me say, I agree with your point completely. I think it really is a matter of balance, and I think more balance needs to be exercised in New York City in terms of protecting the rights of the residents and the concerns of the residents, and trying to avoid these egregious instances.
Now, I know.
It happens in minority areas primarily, and that's another very hard.
What's the status?
Although Mr. Bush, for example, is white. So it happens everywhere, but predominantly minority, I agree.
What's the status of the Civilian Complaint Review Board? I mean, it was started years and years ago. It was big fanfare that at least the citizen would have a forum.
Right.
To have their grievances against the
right. And in
police,
fact, in 1992, the Public Safety Committee passed legislation which completely took the police department out, the Civilian Complaint Review Board out from operation under the police department. All of its employees now are independent of the police department. Most the members are no longer police employees. The thing, though, is the Civilian Complaint Review Board only makes recommendations with respect to individual complaints. It is the police commissioner who imposes discipline. And, during the Giuliani administration, most substantiated complaints by the Civilian Complaint Review Board have in fact not led to meaningful discipline, although the percentages of discipline have increased in recent years. But still, it's ultimately under state law the police commissioner who imposes discipline. So I think there have been improvements in the Civilian Complaint Review Board system, but ultimately what you need is a police commissioner who, in imposing discipline, acts judiciously, holds officers accountable, and is still fair. Unfortunately, the police commissioner doesn't have to even account or explain why he diverged from recommendations of the Civilian Complaint Review Board.
But the police commissioner, in the case that you mentioned in Borough Park, the Bosch case, he said, in his opinion, the police officers acted within their authority.
Right. He did.
You disagree with that?
Based on what I know so far, that is not my judgment. I think what the police commissioner said was they acted in accordance with police procedures.
Well,
and if that's
they did a good job.
No, not necessarily. I think what we have to do perhaps is look at the police procedures for dealing with the mentally depressed people, and perhaps they should be strengthened. There's no substitute for good judgment. As lawyers, we know that.
What would be your advice? If the mayor and the police commissioner were watching now, what would you say to them in the moment we have left?
Okay, I would say they ought to get more involved in the problem. For example, in my opinion, we now have an outstanding corporation counsel, Michael Hess, who I think would be anxious to help, I would hope. And if people such as the councilman Leffler would call on these people to coordinate an effort, both not only a legal point of view, but from a police training point of view, and with the mayor getting involved in this, perhaps some good can come of it, but it needs to be carefully done, but it can't wait. You can't have another killing while we're waiting for it.
Councilman Leffler, what's your advice to the mayor how to stop this?
Look at the recommendations which have been issued by the Public Safety Committee, following the Louima case, the Mayor's Task Force, the dissenters to the Mayor's Task Force, and many recommendations with respect to improving monitoring, improving discipline, accountability, training, recruitment have been made. Implement those recommendations.
Councilman Leffler, you keep talking about recommendations. Don't you have the power to pass any type of more than a recommendation?
We have the power to pass some laws, but ultimately these are matters of management and administration.
Councilman Leffler, thank you very much for appearing on Lawline. Bob Coniston, thank you very much for one more time appearing on Lawline. Sorry I had to cut you off, and this is Alan Schnorman, and as always, thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005, or call area code 212-432-9111. This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law. Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring